Welcome to an introduction to digital minimalism. I'm Stacy from the Iowa City Public Library. And if you joined me last December for a discussion of the book Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport, welcome back for further discussion on this topic. What I've learned is that attention to digital minimalism for me comes in phases, and reminders and opportunities to talk about it are very beneficial. If you didn't come to that discussion, no problem. Our guest presenter is going to talk about the Newport book in addition to some others and expand on it for new perspectives. So Tyler Drigg is an online MLIS student, that's a Master's in Library and Information Studies at the University of Washington in Seattle. He currently lives in Aachen, Germany with his wife and newborn daughter. Before moving to Germany, Tyler worked at the Iowa City Public Library for several years, first as a page and later as a library assistant. So we appreciate having him here for a special project to share this discussion with us.
Yeah, thanks, Stacy. I'm really happy to be here. I just want to say thanks to Stacy for helping to guide me through this process. He's been a very good and patient mentor throughout this journey. And I also want to thank ICPL for the opportunity to present this. I'm really excited to share this with you guys. Along with that, I just want to echo Stacy's previous point that this is definitely a process, not a one and done kind of thing. And so I'm excited to kind of give you guys hopefully a little bit of a nudge to get started on digital minimalism. So welcome to an introduction to digital minimalism. I always think it's a little bit helpful to start with an overview. So my goals in this presentation are to introduce the concept of digital minimalism, talk a little bit about what it is and why it's helpful. And then it's a pretty new but broad area of study. And so I want to introduce some thinkers and some books that kind of approach this philosophy from some different angles. And then along with that, sharing those thinkers, sharing some of those tools that they think are helpful in managing your online presence, your life in the digital world. And then at the end, I want to open things up to have a discussion with all of you about how we're managing our online lives these days, some of the things that work for us individually, and then if you're open to it, then we can talk about some of the things in our online practice that we'd like to change or explore, learn more about. Because I think, like Stacy said, having opportunities to kind of talk about intentional online practices is really helpful and can kind of help you clarify your own thinking. So that's what we're doing. All right. So what is digital minimalism? It sounds really fancy, but what does it actually mean in concrete terms? So digital minimalism is an approach to technology and online life which involves critical and ongoing evaluations of the impacts, costs, and benefits of digital tools in one's life. And so this can be your email, your social media, things like YouTube or Skillshare, other kind of streaming platforms like Twitch, any kind of online tool or computer software that you might use in some way, either in your social or professional life. And I think especially in the last year or two, in particular, but more generally in the last decade or so, these tools have become an ever more present part of our life. And so thinking critically about what these tools do for you, how you use them, how you interact with them, and whether that is healthy and beneficial to you or potentially harmful, can be helpful. So again, kind of underscoring that, why is digital minimalism an attractive choice? Like I said, people are spending more time plugged in these days than ever. Um, there's been many studies about Americans spending more and more time online, um, upwards of several hours a day on occasion. Um, and with your personal and professional life, especially in these wonderful days that we're currently experiencing, with the corona pandemic going on, working from home and taking part in digital events is more common than ever before. And this can be good. It can help us connect with our loved ones from far away. It can enable other forms of communication and productivity, but it can also make us really unhappy. Um, being constantly plugged in, constantly expected to answer emails, constantly bombarded with new information is overwhelming. And our brains aren't really designed to handle the constant barrage of information like that, we're coming to find. So digital minimalism can be an attractive tool and philosophy in terms of rethinking your engagement with digital tools, so that you can strike a more healthy balance. All right, so there's three key thinkers that I want to talk about today. And I've kind of organized them so that they move from a more interior focus to a more exterior focus. So we were talking about David Levy, Cal Newport, and Shoshanna Zuboff. And so when I say a more interior focus to a more exterior focus, what I mean is we're kind of starting off with a more individual-centered practice, things that you can do and change about your mindset and your habits, to kind of broader social impacts. All right. So our first thinker that I'd like to talk about today is David Levy. David Levy is a professor at the University of Washington. I haven't had him before, but I have had several classmates who have. And he focuses a lot on contemplative practice and human-machine interaction, which is a key point for digital minimalism. So he's been at the iSchool since 2001. And before that, he worked in private industry, helping companies like Xerox or Adobe manage the transition from more physical modes of interaction to the digital economy. And he is famous at the iSchool for leading a class on mindful practice in tech. And he's drawn on that experience of teaching that class for several years into some articles and books. And the one I'm going to talk about today is called Mindful Tech, a simple, powerful program to use digital technologies more effectively and with less stress. So this is him kind of drawing from exercises that he does in that class to help people develop some tools for managing their online life. So David Levy's approach to digital minimalism, drawing on his approach to contemplative practice, is really centered around mindfulness and meditative practice. And so what that means is kind of being more present in the moment, trying to really cultivate your attention on what you're focusing on in that particular moment, and slowing down to be present for that, rather than kind of anticipating the next thing that you have to do. You know, rather than I have to check my email so then I can go to this meeting, so then I can check this website so I can do this, that, and the other thing. Kind of slowing down and being present for each tool that you're interacting with. Again, like I mentioned, he's really interested in this idea of human technology interfacing from an information behavior standpoint. And so what that means is he's really interested in how we as people use these tools to gather information, to use our daily life, how they inform our behavior, basically. But beyond that, he's kind of getting at the idea of us as more than people that just use technology, right? Technology is one practice that we perform, but it's only part of our humanity, so to speak. Like, you're more than just your work interactions, your school interactions. And so kind of slowing down and taking some time away from being plugged in to really kind of rebalance. So again, that's kind of hitting on this intentionality that digital minimalism is trying to address. And so part of the tools that Levy encourages us to do, and what he focuses on in his course, are these kind of mindfulness exercises. So mindfulness exercises might include like breathing exercises, taking your eyes away from the screen for 20 to 30 seconds so you can refocus. So you don't have that kind of screen glare that sometimes happens when you can stare at a screen for a really long time. And then also, after you've kind of done that centering activity, to really think about the experience of using this technology. Like, one of the things he talks about a lot in his book is emails as a practice, consistent as something we all have to do several times a day. And so thinking about, in terms of that activity, how it makes you think, the thoughts that go through your head when you're checking your email or performing another tech activity, the feelings that happen when you're performing that technology activity, and then other kind of actions that go along with that. Do you click around your screen a lot? Do you read all your emails very carefully? Do you check anything in your spam folder? Things like that. And another kind of important part of this is then keeping a log. So actually logging, okay, this time when I checked my email, I had so many tabs open. This time when I checked my email, I was thinking this, I was feeling this, I was acting like it resulted in these kinds of behaviors. And then kind of reflecting on those over time. After you've done this log for a certain period of time, you might notice a certain pattern in behaviors, in thoughts or feelings. And then you can kind of think about whether those thoughts, feelings, behaviors, those kind of interactions with whatever tool you're reflecting on are healthy for you, or if there's something in there you'd want to improve on or change. And so this is really kind of an individual activity. It's supposed to be you deciding what's appropriate for you, rather than adhering to a certain set of guidelines. It's supposed to be flexible. All right, so one example of this from his book is this multitasking activity. Since people tend to multitask a lot when we're online, our attention is split in a lot of different ways. And so the goal of his multitasking activity is to assess your level of focus and try to gain more awareness of your habits, like I mentioned. And so in this activity, you might track how often you switch between tasks and tabs. Like if you're checking your email and then you're going to write a document, or you're checking your email, but then you want to switch over here to look at what's going on CNN, or if you have the TV on at the same time, if you're listening to music, something like that. And the goal originally is to track this for 1 week. in terms of how often you switch tasks or tabs or behaviors, and then kind of reflect on how effective that practice was. If it took you a long time to do whatever it was you were trying to do, if you felt kind of more frustrated or drained afterwards, if you felt more anxious, and then if you did, then thinking about how to, if you want to build a more effective practice, or if it might clarify that this is kind of because of a different circumstance that's going on outside your interaction with that technology, if there's some other part of the process you might want to change instead. Like if you only have time to check something really quickly on your way out the door, you might check it on your phone. Just kind of reflecting on the ways and circumstances in which you're interacting with technology. All right, so that was David Levy. Now we're going to talk about Cal Newport just briefly. And so Cal Newport is also a professor. He's at the School of Computer Science at Georgetown University. And he's wrote several books on kind of how to optimize your approach to technology, culture, and particularly study. He started writing books when he was a grad student, I think, about how he approached studying and productivity. And so he really likes the idea of deep focus and learning how to kind of cultivate and train your attention so that you can be, you can use your time effectively and accomplish thinking tasks in a more efficient and optimized way. And so that's a little bit different than Levy's approach, which is more kind of on the emotional balance side of things. Cal Newport is really focused on that act of contemplation and then turning that into action, I guess I would say. And so the book that we're talking about here today is actually called Digital Minimalism. And the subtitle is Choosing a Focused Life in a Noisy World. So again, that idea of focus. So there's three kind of key takeaways from Newport's philosophy that he introduces in Digital Minimalism. The first one is that clutter is costly. Our digital lives are very cluttered in Newport's analysis. We don't have just one tool, but several. You don't just have Facebook, you have Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and Reddit and LinkedIn, that you might have an account on all of these different platforms. And the ways in which we also interact with online tools in our individual lives is also messy. And so having that divided attention, all those different tools can be really hectic and draining. And so his other kind of takeaway then is optimization is important. He is really keyed in on the idea of using whatever tool you're using in the most effective way that you can. So maybe you'd want to use Facebook for a particular group, like maybe you're in a running group or something. And so part of what he suggests is actually having a link just to that specific page in your bookmarks. Never going to like your main Facebook page, just going to these kind of really targeted links. He also thinks you should never click like on a thing because that's not a really deep interaction. It's a shallow one. But we can talk about that more a little bit later. And so then his third approach is intentionality is satisfying. And what that means is in terms of this optimization, you're really cutting out a lot of the services that are offered to you. Like Facebook wants you to like 100 different artists and 100 different pages and to have 1,200 friends, when our mental social networks are only really designed to support like 100 to 200 people that we can have meaningful interactions with. And so when you're cutting down on these services, you're really shaving away a lot of what they're trying to offer you to use it in the way that makes the most sense for you. And so what Newport is saying is, by using these tools in this targeted way, you're knowing that you're using that in an expression of your values. And so it's you can take satisfaction from that, even though you're not taking advantage of the smorgasbord of options that are available to you. So I want to talk a little bit about how one tool that he kind of suggests for implementing digital minimalism is the idea of the digital decluttering, which is kind of familiar to people maybe from some other thinkers. And so one thing that Newport kind of suggests is called doing a digital fast. So really stopping any kind of non-essential activity for a period of 30 days. And so this includes stuff like streaming, social media, any kind of apps on your phone, video games, if that's something that you practice, really cutting all that out that you don't need for work. Obviously, if you need to check your email and stuff for work, or if your work involves you going on social media to post things for your company, that's not non-essential. But anything you don't have to do for your job or your your immediate personal contacts, you should stop for a period of time. Ideally, before you start this detox, you'd find some real world activities that you find satisfying. For Newport, that includes things like reading or writing. Could also include exercise, like taking a walk, going for a run. Could also include socializing with people, or kind of a craft activity like woodworking, sewing, some kind of hobby that is in the physical world that can occupy some of your free time that you aren't using in front of a screen. And so then after 30 days, then you can come back and see how much of this technology that you cut out was actually filling a need for you, how much of it was something that was actually useful, and then think about how you can then add that back in, and what use they fulfill in your life. So again, what Newport advocates is not thinking of the digital fast as like a detox. It's not like you're going on a diet and then you're gonna completely add everything back in. It's not a temporary thing. It's supposed to kind of, again, have this intentionality to it where you're being very focused on how you're using a service and what use that fulfills for you. And then really radically rethinking your relationship with that technology. So he also has some pretty strict implementation rules for that, which I think are helpful to consider in terms of if you want to cut back on activities. And so those are really thinking about what is important for you, what technologies serve a need, and because of his focus on optimization and intentionality, it's important that we don't confuse convenience with critical need. Like, it's pretty convenient to be able to refresh a news website 30 times a day and keep completely up to date, but that's also really stressful. And so maybe you only need to check it in the morning and at night, or subscribe to a newsletter instead, or listen to a podcast. One thing that Newport also points out is that inconvenience can be a clarifying factor in terms of which activities are important and which things aren't. So if it's really deeply inconvenient for you, that probably points out that it's filling a need, or at least was in the way of you fulfilling a need. And if you don't really notice when you give something up, then it probably wasn't important. So again, kind of going along with that example of the Facebook links, Newport really is liking nuanced operating procedures. So maybe you only listen to podcasts while you're commuting or doing the dishes, but not just in your idle time. Maybe you only use Netflix with other people and not by yourself. And also, it's important when you're starting this process or designing your implementation rules to write things down and then refer to those rules often, so that you know how things are going to go, so you don't kind of fall back into bad habits. All right, so that was Cal Newport. And so far with David Levy and with Cal Newport, we've had a lot of focus on what we as individuals can do in terms of managing what is going on with our relationship with technology, in terms of thinking about how we, it's kind of our individual responsibilities. And Shoshanna Zuboff is more focused on our kind of collective responsibilities. She's a professor emerita at Harvard Business School, and she also has a background in sociology. And throughout her whole career, she's spent a lot of time dealing with capitalism and the digital economy. And her most recent book is called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism: The Fight for a Human Future at the New Frontier of Power. And so she's kind of taking this really broad view of how tech companies interact with us, and how we as democratic citizens can kind of go about doing that collectively rather than individually. All right. So again, like I've been hitting on, Zuboff has a broader societal focus rather than talking about what we can do as individuals. It's kind of a running theme throughout a lot of digital minimalism writing, that tech companies don't have your best interests in mind when they're designing a service or offering things to you. The goal of a tech company usually is to kind of drive engagement with their service, right? They want to keep your eyes on the screen, keep you sharing links, which may or may not be accurate, keep you engaged in conversations which may or may not be healthy, because those kind of show up as activity on their platforms, right? And so in Newport's book, for instance, he talks a lot about Google and Apple in terms of like developing technologies and platforms that are designed to steal your attention, basically. Designed to keep you focused on using that rather than anything else in your life that might be going on. And Zuboff takes this rhetoric and then continues it, turns it up even more. So for Zuboff, she's focused a lot on the legal and social context surrounding tech companies. With Facebook in particular, there's just not a lot of regulation in terms of how transparent they have to be about how they're using your data, who they're giving your data to, kind of changes that they make to the service, and how they respect user privacy. And so for her, they're very potentially dangerous entities that don't have a lot of regulation, or our regulatory bodies haven't caught up to the services that they're providing. And this is potentially undemocratic because it's a very small number of people that are making decisions that then affect millions or billions of people. You know, there's only a couple senior people that make decisions at Google. There's only one, Mark Zuckerberg, at Facebook. And then the tech companies that design these services and the algorithms that influence what you see are also very small, like 50 people. But there's over 2 billion Facebook users, for instance. And the other kind of critique that Zuboff advances is that big data and big tech companies have a fundamental division between users and consumers. Facebook isn't a service that makes its money from how you interact with the service, but you as a Facebook user are kind of the product that Facebook then sells to other people. Same with Google, same with Apple, same with Microsoft, all these other kind of big tech companies. And so this might be familiar to you if you went into my cookies one last week. But cookies can, when you go online, you are giving up a lot of information about your activity to these other services. And then they can turn around and sell that information to other people and make some really specific inferences about your behavior and your identity. And so for Zuboff, this is obviously a pretty dystopian scenario where we've given away a lot of our privacy and our information to these companies in ways that we don't understand. And then those companies can turn around and influence our behavior in ways that we may not be aware of. So thinking back a few years ago with like Cambridge Analytica and the whole thing with misinformation on Facebook in the 2016 election, that's a really good example of the kind of things that Zuboff is concerned about. And so these are obviously big issues. And so what Zuboff kind of advances is more democratic and regulatory control of these tech companies so that we don't have to make the kind of decisions that we do in terms of giving away a lot of our privacy and not having control of how our information is used and by whom. So more transparency, more regulation, more democratic norms in these kind of online tools. And so part of what Zuboff is talking about then is like legislative and collective actions rather than individual ones. And so I wanted to share a couple kind of tech conscious organizations that are doing the same kind of work. The first is the Center for Humane Technology. And this is a nonprofit organization that started by Tristan Harris, who's an ex-Google programmer that also gets talked about in Newport's book. In particular, he gave a very famous presentation about user dignity in the context of big tech companies in 2013. And now he's running this nonprofit organization around tech issues. The other organization I wanted to highlight was the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization in the realm of online privacy, which you might recognize from my cookies presentation last week if you were like that, if you were at that. And just in case you weren't, that also exists on ICPL's video archive, so you can check that out if you want to. All right, so we're getting to the end of what I had for you guys. I just wanted to look at these tools that I had for kind of getting you started on digital minimalism tools. All right, so this is one kind of handout that I designed. Let's zoom in a little bit more. Not that much. Yeah, that's a little better. All right. So this is just kind of a basic worksheet that I thought would be helpful in terms of if you guys wanted to kind of get started on an inventory. So you could think about what kind of programs you use, apps on your phone, for instance, social media profiles you might use, other kind of tech tools like emails. So that's all over here on the left side. And then on the right side, we have things that are more aspirational. So your values in terms of your ideals, other kind of hobbies you might do that aren't digital, and then kind of your goals for your tech practice. So this is just kind of an idea of helping you think about which tools might be essential, which might be less essential, which might be more aligned with your values. And then I also have, based on David Levy's work, this kind of reflection worksheet that might be helpful for you guys too. And so this is just kind of a journal page, basically, that talks about whatever kind of tech activity you might be doing, like checking your email, checking your Facebook, other kind of tech activities. And so then just going through those thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and then kind of thinking about then afterwards, after you've reflected on these for a period of time, being like, oh yeah, this process isn't actually helping me in the way that I want it to. So it might be more helpful if I, didn't refresh my email like 20 times, or if I spent more time actually reading my emails, or if I, yes.
Sorry, could you zoom in on that one too?
Oh yeah, of course, sorry. All right, so we'll go 75% zoom. Yeah, so here's that first page. Again, the thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and then kind of, again, rethinking your process. So I think it would be helpful if I changed this part about the process, and then kind of thinking about what concrete actions can I implement to make that process happen. All right, so now we'll go back to the PowerPoint. But there's just a couple more slides. And one that I wanted to talk about was the further reading that you might want to do, because I have some other kind of books that talk about similar topics. I kind of have them organized by which title they kind of match up with the most based on the ones that I talked about. So in just a minute, we'll have that up. And these can also be things that, along with the handouts that Stacy can send in the follow-up email that you'll get after this event. So
We all know
yeah,
how long it
so you
takes.
don't have to just write everything down right now if you don't want to.
I was gonna say, we all know how long it takes
Information
PowerPoint
will
to
be
get
there for you
started,
later as
but
well.
I'm curious, has anybody
All
already
right.
read things by
So I
David
got that back
Levy
up.
or Shoshanna Zuboff?
All right, there we go. Further reading. Here we go. And on the left, we have the books that we talked about. And then over here, there's some other ones. There's some overlap here in terms of which titles kind of go with. There's a few about kind of optimizing your workflow or your activity flow, I guess I could say. It's not necessarily just your work. And building better habits. There's also specifically ones with like your digital tools, like how to break up with your phone. And then there's some specifically around social media and predatory tech practices that you can see there at the bottom. So these are all really good kind of titles that have come out in the last 4 or 5 years that if you're interested in these topics might be of interest to you. So yeah, at this point, we're going to go into the discussion. And for the most part, this will be not recorded, so we can kind of protect people's privacy. But in case you're watching this later on ICPL's YouTube, then just for some things for you to think about are which tech practices have been working for you if you've been trying to introduce or implement digital minimalism in your own life. What are some things that you're proud about that have been working for you? What are some things you'd like to implement? And then what are some topics within digital minimalism that you want to learn more about? If you're like, oh, I've been kind of struggling with this aspect of my online life, I want to learn more about how people manage this.